Welcome back, everyone, and if you're new here, I'm so glad you found the channel. We're on an exciting journey to reach 10k subscribers by next year, and every like, comment and subscription brings us one step closer. Your support means everything. Now, let's jump into today's video. The vast expanse of space holds many secrets, but none quite as terrifying as what we discovered at the edge of our solar system. I need to share this story, not just because the public deserves to know the truth, but because we need to warn others about what's out there waiting in the darkness beyond Pluto. My name is Dr. Grace Cooper, and until 3 months ago, I was the lead communications director for NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Program. Before I begin this account, I should mention that I've spent 23 years in space communications, dealing with everything from Mars rovers to deep space probes. I've heard every kind of interference, static and anomalous signal you can imagine. What I'm about to share is different. This isn't a story about losing contact with a space station. It's about finding something that should have remained unfound. I still remember my first day overseeing Orion's Reach communications. The station gleamed against the backdrop of space, a testament to human engineering. Its distinctive cross-shaped design housed 6 separate research modules, each dedicated to different aspects of deep space study. The central hub, where most of the crew spent their time, contained the most advanced monitoring equipment ever created by human hands. 2 extending wings housed the living quarters and research laboratories, while the vertical sections contained the power systems and backup facilities. The crew selection process had been rigorous. I sat in on the final interviews, watching as candidates were subjected to increasingly challenging psychological evaluations. We needed people who could handle not just the isolation of deep space, but the profound existential implications of their research. Commander Thomas Blake stood out immediately. His record spoke of someone who had stared into the abyss before and come back stronger. During his interview, he spoke about an encounter during a previous mission near Jupiter, something his official records didn't mention. The way his eyes darkened when he discussed it convinced me he was the right person to lead this mission. Lieutenant Mark Jensen had an unusual background for a space station communications officer. Before NASA, he'd spent 5 years studying deep-sea creatures in the Mariana Trench. His research papers focused on bioluminescent organisms that lived in complete darkness, and how they developed methods of communication we still didn't fully understand. During his psychological evaluation, he mentioned that his time in the deep-sea research station had taught him that isolation wasn't just about being alone. It was about being surrounded by an environment that was fundamentally alien to human life. Dr. Rebecca Hall's credentials were impeccable. 3 PhDs, countless published papers on astrobiology and extreme environments. But what truly set her apart was her work on pattern recognition in seemingly random cosmic phenomena. She developed algorithms that could detect order in the chaos of space, finding connections that others missed. Her colleagues often joked that she could see patterns in static. Later, we would discover just how prophetic that joke was. The rest of the crew was equally exceptional. Dr. James Wilson had pioneered new theories about quantum entanglement in deep space. His work suggested that the void between stars wasn't as empty as we thought, that information could travel through channels we couldn't yet detect. Engineer Lisa Thompson had helped design the station's unique power systems, incorporating theoretical technology that drew energy from what she called space-time fluctuations. Technical officer David Park brought decades of experience with experimental propulsion systems and had an uncanny ability to fix equipment that others deemed beyond repair. During their final group evaluation, I noticed something peculiar. When asked about their greatest fears, each crew member independently mentioned dreams about vast, dark spaces. At the time, we attributed this to their chosen profession, Anyone willing to venture into the outer reaches of our solar system must have some preoccupation with the void. Now I wonder if something was already calling to them, preparing them for what they would find. The launch day was picture perfect. I remember standing in mission control, watching as the transport ship carried them towards their home. For the next 2 years, the journey to Orion's reach would take 3 months, during which the crew would remain in controlled hibernation. During that time, I reviewed their personal logs from previous missions, trying to better understand the people whose voices would become my daily companions. Commander Blake's Jupiter incident particularly intrigued me. The official report listed it as a routine equipment malfunction, but his personal log told a different story. During a spacewalk to repair communication arrays, he described seeing something move in Jupiter's atmosphere that didn't match any known atmospheric phenomena. He wrote about colours that shouldn't exist, patterns in the clouds that seemed to respond to his presence. The incident was quickly classified, and Blake never spoke about it publicly again. The first 9 months aboard Orion's Reach were remarkably smooth. The crew fell into their routines, conducting their research with the precision and dedication we expected. Dr. Hall's deep space scans revealed fascinating anomalies in the Kuiper Belt, while Dr. Wilson documented strange quantum readings that he couldn't quite explain. Lieutenant Jensen maintained constant communication with Earth, his reports detailed and professional, though sometimes he would mention odd fluctuations in the background radiation that our equipment couldn't quite identify. The first sign that something was wrong came during a routine maintenance check of the station's outer hull. Engineer Thompson and Technical Officer Park were conducting external repairs when they noticed unusual wear patterns on the station's surface. The metal showed signs of erosion that, according to Thompson, resembled patterns she'd once seen on deep-sea submarines, as if something had been testing the hull's strength, probing for weaknesses. During their inspection, both Thompson and Park reported experiencing what they called time slips, moments where they lost track of time completely. Park's suit camera recorded him floating motionless for 6 minutes, staring into the darkness beyond Pluto, though he had no memory of doing so. Thompson's vital signs showed periodic spikes in brain activity that our medical team couldn't explain. The station's internal sensors began picking up anomalous readings shortly after. Dr. Wilson noted that the quantum fluctuations he'd been studying were becoming more frequent and intense. He described them as ripples in reality, moments where the fundamental laws of physics seemed to briefly waver. Equipment would malfunction in specific patterns, always at the same time across different sections of the station. Dr. Hall's behaviour changed subtly at first. Her research logs became increasingly focused on a particular region of space just beyond Pluto's orbit. She spoke of patterns in the void, movements that shouldn't be possible, in empty space. During one late-night transmission, she confided in me about a recurring dream she'd been having, a vision of ancient cities built in geometries that the human mind couldn't comprehend. "These dreams feel like memories," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Not human memories, but something older. Much older. And the strangest part is, I'm not the only one having them. Commander Blake drew something yesterday that matched exactly what I saw in my dream, down to the smallest detail. We'd never discussed it before." The crew's sleep patterns began to deteriorate. Lieutenant Jensen reported that during the station's night cycle, he could hear something moving through the walls. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was more like liquid flowing through veins, but the station's diagnostic systems showed no leaks or fluid movement. Commander Blake ordered a complete sweep of the station's infrastructure, but they found nothing unusual. Yet the sounds continued. Dr. Wilson set up sensitive recording equipment throughout the station, hoping to capture and analyze whatever was causing the disturbances. What he recorded defied explanation. The audio files contained frequencies that shouldn't have been possible in the station's environment, sounds that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. One night, during what should have been a routine video conference, Commander Blake shared something disturbing. "The station feels different," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The corridors, they're longer than they should be. We've measured them dozens of times, but the dimensions keep changing. And the viewing windows, sometimes when you look out them for too long, you start to see things that move in ways that..." He trailed off, running his hands through his hair, which I noticed had begun to grey considerably. "Yesterday, Thompson found a door that shouldn't exist," he continued. "It was in a section of the station we pass through every day, but none of us had ever seen it before. When we tried to open it, the metal felt wrong, like it was warm and pulsing. We checked the station's blueprints. That door isn't in any of the designs. It shouldn't be there. But when we went back to document it, the door was gone. The wall was smooth, like it had never existed." The crew's personal logs during this period reveal a growing awareness that they weren't alone on the station. Dr. Wilson wrote about seeing his own reflection move independently in the screens of his equipment. Thompson reported tools disappearing from sealed containers, only to reappear days later, arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Park began sleeping in the main control room, claiming his quarters had become unfamiliar during the night cycle. Dr. Hall's research took an obsessive turn. She spent hours staring at the deep space readings, muttering about patterns that seemed to repeat across different scales of space and time. Her lab became a maze of holographic projections, each showing different aspects of what she called the signal. The walls were covered in drawings that made my eyes hurt to look at them. Not because they were grotesque, but because they seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. "The signal isn't coming from space," she told me during one late-night transmission. "It's coming from time. Whatever's out there, it exists in our past and our future simultaneously, and it's been watching us, guiding us, since before we crawled out of the oceans." Her voice had taken on a strange quality, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. Commander Blake's authority began to slip as the crew's behaviour became more erratic. During one memorable incident, he found Lieutenant Jensen in the communications hub, having disassembled critical equipment. Jensen claimed he needed to clean out the voices that had been hiding in the circuitry. When Blake confronted him, Jensen spoke in what the commander described as a language that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. The station's environmental system started exhibiting inexplicable patterns. Areas of extreme cold would appear and disappear randomly, accompanied by visible distortions in the air. The recycling systems began producing water with strange properties. It would flow against gravity or form into perfect spheres that hung motionless in the air. Dr. Wilson collected samples for analysis, but each time he tried to study them, his equipment would malfunction in increasingly bizarre ways. During the station's night cycle, the crew reported hearing what sounded like whale songs echoing through the hull. But these weren't recordings or hallucinations. The sounds were picked up by multiple recording devices. When analysed, the audio revealed layers of complexity that suggested intelligence. Dr. Hall believed they were attempts at communication. "It's like they're singing to each other," she wrote in her final research log. "Not the crew, the things in the walls, the things that have been here all along, wearing faces that look like ours when we glimpse them in reflective surfaces. They're coordinating something, building something inside the station's infrastructure, using materials we can't see or understand." The breaking point came when Engineer Thompson accessed a sealed compartment in the station's lower level. She had been tracking unusual power fluctuations to their source and discovered a hidden room that contained equipment none of the crew had been briefed about. The technology was like nothing they'd seen before. Curved panels covered in symbols that seemed to move when no one was looking directly at them, and devices that hummed with an energy that made the air itself vibrate. "This isn't our technology," Thompson reported, her voice shaking. "Some of these components, they're not built. They're grown, and they're still growing. The metal is warm, like skin, and when I cut into a panel to examine it, it bled. Not blood, but something that moved on its own, something that tried to flow up my tools toward my hands. The station's true purpose began to reveal itself through fragments of classified data that emerged as the main computer systems deteriorated. Hidden files spoke of an object discovered decades ago, buried deep in Pluto's ice. The first expedition to study it had vanished without a trace. The second expedition returned with only one survivor, who spent the rest of their life in a secure facility, alternating between catatonia and periods of impossible knowledge. Orion's reach wasn't built to study deep space. It was constructed around the object after it was moved from Pluto's surface. The station's sophisticated research equipment wasn't designed to look outward at the stars, but inward at something that defied human comprehension. The crew had been carefully chosen not just for their skills, but for their potential compatibility with whatever lay dormant within the station's heart. Dr. Hall's final personal log entry revealed the horrible truth. She had discovered that the station's layout was no accident. Its cross-shaped design formed a complex containment pattern, with each module positioned to channel and control energies we barely understood. The crew's quarters were arranged in a specific pattern that, when mapped in 3 dimensions, created a configuration that matched ancient symbols found in archaeological sites across Earth. "We're not conducting research here," she wrote, her normally precise handwriting becoming increasingly erratic. "We're performing a ritual. Our daily routines, our movements through the station, even our sleep cycles, they're all part of a pattern designed to wake something up. And now it's working. God help us, it's finally working." Commander Blake's last official log painted a picture of mounting chaos. The station's interior had begun to change in ways that violated physical laws. Corridors would stretch endlessly in one direction, only to lead back to their starting point. Rooms would suddenly contain corners that couldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Crew members reported seeing versions of themselves performing tasks in other parts of the station, only to have those actions occur hours or days later. "The boundaries are breaking down," Blake recorded, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Not just the boundaries of space inside the station, but the boundaries between past and future, between consciousness and reality. Yesterday I watched Dr. Wilson walk into his lab and age 30 years. In the span of minutes, then reverse back to his normal self. He had no memory of it, but the security footage shows it happening. At least, it shows it happening now. When we first reviewed the footage, it showed something entirely different." Lieutenant Jensen's behavior became increasingly alarming. During communications with Earth, he would slip into trances, his voice changing pitch and tone as he recited what seemed like random numbers and coordinates. When played backward, these transmissions contained clear messages in languages that hadn't been spoken on Earth for thousands of years. Technical Officer Park made a devastating discovery while trying to repair the station's deteriorating life support systems. The metal walls of the station had become porous at a molecular level, allowing something to seep through from somewhere else. Under microscopic examination, the station's structure showed signs of biological growth, as if the metal itself was gradually being replaced by living tissue. Engineer Thompson's final report described the horrifying transformation of her tools and equipment. Instruments would fuse together overnight, forming new devices that served unknown purposes. Her carefully organized tool chest became a nest of writhing metal tendrils that responded to human presence. She sealed off her workshop after finding her favorite wrench had developed what looked like a primitive nervous system. Dr. Wilson's last known act was to barricade himself in his laboratory, where he worked frantically to document the violations of physics occurring throughout the station. His final equations suggested that space itself was becoming unstable around Orion's reach, as if reality was being worn thin by something trying to push through from the other side. It was during my last routine video call with Lieutenant Jensen that I noticed something that still haunts my dreams. As he spoke, describing the increasing frequency of equipment malfunctions, I saw his reflection in the monitor behind him. The reflection's movements were slightly out of sync, but that wasn't what chilled me to my core. Its face bore an expression of pure terror, mouthing words of warning, while Jensen himself continued his calm report. When I tried to warn him about what I was seeing, the reflection pressed its finger to its lips in a silencing gesture. The next day, Dr. Hall made an unauthorized broadcast directly to my personal communication channel. Her face was gaunt, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and terrible understanding. She had been analyzing data from the station's deep space sensors, comparing them with historical records from Earth's earliest civilizations. The petroglyphs, the cave paintings, the ancient monuments, they're all warnings, she whispered, constantly glancing over her shoulder. Our ancestors saw them, knew about them. Every culture has stories about things that live in the dark between the stars. We thought they were myths, but they were memories. Memories of the last time they came. She proceeded to show me her latest findings. The station's sensors had detected an enormous anomaly beyond Pluto's orbit, a void in space that seemed to swallow all light and energy. But it wasn't static. It was moving, growing, reaching out with tendrils of darkness that defied all known laws of physics. This thing, this entity, it's ancient, older than our solar system, Hall continued, her words tumbling out faster. And it's not alone. There are others sleeping in the dark places of every galaxy. They've been guiding us, manipulating our development, our technology, our drive to explore space. It's all been leading to this moment. We didn't build this station to study them. They influenced us to build it as a doorway. The station's internal cameras began capturing increasingly disturbing phenomena. Crew members would appear in multiple locations simultaneously. Objects would age thousands of years in seconds, then revert to normal. In one particularly chilling incident, security footage showed Engineer Thompson having a lengthy conversation with herself, except the other version of her was speaking in a language that linguists later confirmed had been dead for over 10,000 years. Commander Blake's behavior became increasingly erratic. During his final recorded log, he described finding a new room that had grown in the center of the station. The room's walls were covered in patterns that moved and shifted, forming into images that showed possible futures, most of them too horrifying to describe. "There's something you need to understand about time," he explained, his voice carrying an unnatural echo. "It's not linear, not like we thought. It's more like a web, and in the center of that web, something is stirring. The future isn't set. It's alive, conscious, hungry, and it's been reaching back through time, preparing us for its arrival." Technical Officer Park's last known location was the station's lower level, where he had discovered something growing in the waste recycling system. His body camera footage showed masses of writhing material that seemed to be forming itself into complex organic machinery. When he tried to take samples, the substance reached for him with purpose and intelligence. The station's power grid began experiencing massive fluctuations that corresponded with what Dr. Hall called consciousness waves among the crew. During these events, every crew member would simultaneously experience the same vision: a vast, ancient intelligence stirring in the void, reaching through time and space with tendrils of pure darkness. These shared hallucinations left behind physical evidence: scorch marks on the walls that formed intricate patterns, electronic devices that recorded impossible data, and strange artifacts that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Engineer Thompson's final log entry described finding a chamber that hadn't existed the day before. The room was filled with what appeared to be ancient technology, but it was like nothing ever created on Earth. The devices seemed to pulse with their own internal energy, and the walls were covered in markings that moved and rearranged themselves when observed. Most disturbing was a central pillar that appeared to be made of solid darkness, absorbing all light that touched it. "The metal isn't just changing," she reported, her voice trembling. "It's evolving. The station's structure is becoming something else, something alive. I cut into a panel yesterday and watched it heal itself. The new material isn't metal or organic. It's both and neither. It responds to thoughts, to emotions. Sometimes I think I can hear it whispering." Lieutenant Jensen's behavior in the final days became increasingly bizarre. During routine transmissions, he would stop mid-sentence and stare into space, his eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. He spoke of dreams where he witnessed the birth of the universe, but from the perspective of something that existed before time began. His quarters were found covered in drawings that depicted impossible structures and entities that defied description. "They're not invading," he told me during one of his last transmissions. "They're returning. Earth was theirs long before it was ours. The dinosaurs didn't die from a meteor. They were an experiment that was terminated when it failed to produce the desired results. We're the next experiment, and we've finally reached the testing phase." Dr. Wilson emerged from his barricaded lab 3 days before all communication ceased. His hair had turned completely white, and his eyes had changed colour in a way that our medical team couldn't explain. He carried with him a device he had constructed from cannibalizing multiple scientific instruments. The device, he claimed, could detect distortions in reality itself. "The boundaries between dimensions are like tissue paper here," he explained in his final report. "Every time we think we're measuring space, we're actually measuring them. Our instruments, our experiments. We've been documenting their activities all along. We just didn't know how to interpret the data. They exist in the spaces between spaces, in angles that don't exist in our geometry, and now they're pushing through." Commander Blake's last official transmission was a warning. He had discovered documents in a hidden database that revealed the true history of human space exploration. Every major breakthrough in space travel, every technological advancement that got us closer to the stars, had been subtly guided by an unseen influence. The station's classified mission wasn't to make contact with alien intelligence. It was to complete a process that had begun millions of years ago. "Look at our history," he insisted, his eyes wild with desperate understanding. "Every leap forward in space technology happened after unexplained incidents. The scientists and engineers behind our greatest advancements all reported strange dreams, unexplainable inspirations. We thought we were reaching for the stars by our own will, but we were being pulled towards something. Everything we've built, every step we've taken into space was part of their plan." The final hours before communication loss were a descent into nightmare. Dr. Hall's research lab had become a focal point for the strange phenomena affecting the station. Her equipment recorded energy patterns that formed themselves into complex moving symbols. The walls of her lab appeared to breathe, and her research notes described hearing voices that spoke in frequencies that human ears shouldn't be able to detect. "They're showing me things," she transmitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The history of our universe, but not from our perspective. I can see the void between galaxies, and it's full of them. They're everywhere, watching, waiting. Some are as large as solar systems. Others could fit in a human cell. They've been here all along, living in the spaces we can't perceive, and now they're ready to step through." The station's internal cameras captured increasingly impossible events. In one feed, Engineer Thompson was seen walking down a corridor that extended forever, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she vanished into infinity. Another camera showed Dr. Wilson conducting experiments with equipment that appeared to be alive, its components shifting and reorganizing themselves like the cells of a living organism. Lieutenant Jensen's final personal log revealed the horrifying truth about the station's construction. The materials used weren't just advanced alloys. They were specifically designed to be transformed. The metal itself was meant to evolve, to become something that could bridge the gap between our reality and whatever existed beyond it. "The station isn't just changing," he recorded, his voice distorting with frequencies that made the recording equipment malfunction. "It's becoming a living entity. The walls don't just carry power and data anymore. They carry consciousness. Their consciousness, every circuit, every panel, every cable, is being converted into neural pathways for something vast and ancient. We're inside a mind that's slowly waking up." Technical Officer Park's body camera captured the last known footage of the lower levels. The recycling systems had become unrecognizable, transformed into pulsing organs that processed energy instead of waste. The footage showed dark fluid flowing through transparent conduits, but the fluid moved against gravity and seemed to react to human presence. When Park approached one of the tubes, the liquid formed into patterns that mirrored his movements, like it was studying him. The final transmission from Orion's reach came without warning. All 6 crew members appeared on screen simultaneously, but something was terribly wrong. Their movements were synchronized in a way that human bodies shouldn't be capable of, and their voices overlapped in perfect harmony, speaking in multiple languages at once. "The door is open," they said in unison, their eyes reflecting a light that our cameras couldn't detect. "What sleeps beyond Pluto has awakened. They've been patient, guiding us, preparing us for this moment. Human consciousness was the key. They needed us to reach a certain level of awareness before they could make contact. And now, finally, we understand our true purpose." Behind the crew, the station's walls rippled like liquid metal. Dark shapes moved in the background, casting shadows that didn't match any visible light source. The camera feed began to distort, showing glimpses of spaces that couldn't exist within the station's known dimensions. In the final frame before transmission cut off, something vast and dark moved behind the crew, its form suggesting geometries that made my mind recoil. Then, silence. Complete and absolute silence that felt almost alive in its intensity. The next 72 hours were chaos at Mission Control. Every attempt to re-establish communication failed in increasingly bizarre ways. Equipment would power down seconds before making contact, or send back signals that contained impossible data. One particularly disturbing attempt resulted in our main communication array receiving transmissions from itself, from 3 weeks in the future. Dr. Blackwood arrived with his team 4 days after we lost contact. I hadn't known such a department existed within NASA, the Deep Space Anomaly Response Team. They transformed our facility overnight, installing equipment I'd never seen before and establishing protocols that seemed more suited to containing a hostile entity than rescuing a stranded crew. "This isn't the first time this has happened," Blackwood revealed during a private briefing. His office was lined with devices that hummed at frequencies that made my teeth ache. "We've lost other stations, other crews. The public never knew because we buried the evidence so deep that even most of NASA doesn't know about it. Pioneer's Edge was just the most recent before Orion's reach." He showed me classified files dating back to the 1960s. Early space programs across the globe had encountered similar phenomena. Spacecraft that disappeared, crews that returned changed in subtle but horrifying ways. The moon missions had found structures that were carefully erased from all public footage. Even our first Mars rovers had transmitted back images that never made it to the public archives. "Every step we've taken into space has been observed, monitored, guided," Blackwood explained. "We thought we were exploring the solar system, but we were being led along a predetermined path. Everything, from the design of our spacecraft to the psychological profiles of our crews, was subtly influenced by something that's been waiting out there in the darkness." The rescue mission came together with frightening speed, as if it had been planned long in advance. The rogue Horizon wasn't just a rescue vessel. It was a ship designed for encountering things that existed beyond human understanding. Its hull was lined with materials engineered to resist forces that defied physics. The crew were chosen not just for their skills, but for their experience with the unexplainable. Dr. Evan Liu, the mission's lead scientist, had survived 3 previous encounters with what he would only refer to as deep space anomalies. His personal files contained incident reports that had been heavily classified, describing encounters that had left him with the ability to perceive things others couldn't see. Space isn't empty, he told me during mission preparation. It's full of things that exist just outside our ability to perceive them. Sometimes, if you know how to look, you can catch glimpses of them watching us. They're patient. They've been waiting for us to reach a certain point in our development. And now, with Orion's reach, we've finally given them what they wanted. A door. I oversaw all transmissions between Earth and our most distant space station, Orion's Reach. The station was our crowning achievement, a testament to human ingenuity positioned near Pluto's orbit. At least, that's what we told the public. The station had been operational for 14 months, maintaining perfect contact with Earth. Our crew of 6 elite astronauts conducted what appeared to be routine research, studying the Kuiper Belt, collecting data about the outer solar system, and monitoring deep space signals. Commander Thomas Blake led the team, bringing 15 years of spaceflight experience. Lieutenant Mark Jensen handled communications and systems operations, while Dr. Rebecca Hall managed the scientific research division. The rest of the crew, Dr. James Wilson, engineer Lisa Thompson, and technical officer David Park, were among the finest specialists NASA had ever trained. Everything ran smoothly until the night shift on October 15th, 2045. I remember it clearly because I had just finished my usual video conference with Lieutenant Jensen. He seemed different that evening, distracted, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something I couldn't quite place. During our call, he kept glancing over his shoulder at something off-screen. "The station feels different lately," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The corridors seem longer somehow. And the sounds..." He paused, running a hand through his greying hair. "I know it's impossible, but we're hearing things that shouldn't exist out here." I asked him to elaborate, but he just shook his head. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Besides, Commander Blake thinks it's just stress from the isolation." Maybe he's right. That was the last normal conversation I had with any crew member of Orion's Reach. The next morning, our first sign of trouble came when the station's automated data stream became erratic. Usually we received a constant flow of information, everything from system status reports to research data. But now the stream was corrupted with bursts of static and inexplicable gaps. Our technical team initially blamed it on solar activity, but I knew better. In 15 years of deep space communications, I'd never seen interference patterns like this. Over the next 3 days, conditions deteriorated rapidly. The crew reported experiencing severe insomnia and vivid nightmares. Commander Blake described walking through the station's halls during their designated night cycle, only to find other crew members standing motionless in dark corners, staring into empty space. When confronted, they had no memory of leaving their quarters. Dr. Hall's research logs became increasingly concerning. She documented unusual energy readings emanating from somewhere beyond Pluto's orbit. According to her calculations, something out there was distorting the very fabric of space around the station. The deeper she dug into the phenomenon, the more agitated she became. During what would be one of our final transmissions, Dr. Hall broke protocol and requested a private channel. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "There's something they're not telling us, Dr. Cooper. I found classified files hidden in the station's database. Orion's Reach wasn't built for research. It's an observation post. They knew something was out here, Waiting. We're not studying space. We're watching something that's been watching us. Before I could press her for more information, Commander Blake interrupted the transmission. His official report stated that Dr. Hall was suffering from psychological distress and had been relieved of duty. But in the background of that same transmission, I heard her screaming words that still haunt me. "It's waking up! God help us, it's finally waking up!" The final transmission from Orion's Reach came at 7:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 19th. Lieutenant Jensen managed to override the commander's communications lockdown. The video quality was poor, filled with static and strange distortions, but what I saw chills me to this day. Jensen's face was gaunt, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him, emergency lights pulsed in a rhythm that didn't match any known warning system. "The darkness is here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We should never have gone this far. They built this station knowing what was out here. We were never meant to study space. We were meant to..." The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a sound that defied description, a frequency that made my bones ache and my vision blur. Then, silence. Complete and absolute silence. For a week we tried everything to re-establish contact. Every radio telescope on Earth was pointed toward Pluto's orbit. We sent thousands of signals, hoping for even the smallest response. The station's automated system should have kicked in, sending out distress beacons. But there was nothing, just an unsettling void where Orion's Reach should have been. I couldn't accept the silence. I spent days reviewing the final transmissions, analysing every frame, every distorted sound. That's when I noticed something in the background of Jensen's last message, something that shouldn't have been possible. In the reflection of a darkened monitor behind him, I saw Dr. Hall standing perfectly still, but her reflection wasn't matching her movements. As she turned her head in the footage, her reflection turned a full second later. When I brought this to my superior's attention, their reaction surprised me. Instead of dismissal or skepticism, they immediately classified the footage. Within hours, a special task force arrived at Mission Control. They called themselves the Deep Space Anomaly Response Team, DSART, and their existence had been kept secret from even high-ranking NASA officials like myself. The team's leader, Dr. Philip Blackwood, was a man whose very presence commanded attention. His silver hair and weathered face spoke of decades spent dealing with things beyond human understanding. He reviewed my findings in silence, then shared a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about our space program. Orion's Reach wasn't our first station near Pluto, he revealed, his voice heavy with the weight of classified history. In 2031, we established a small research post called Pioneer's Edge. Like Orion's Reach, it went dark. When the rescue mission arrived, they found the entire structure had been turned inside out. Not destroyed, but literally inverted, every surface facing an impossible direction. The crew's bodies were never found. Blackwood's team transformed Mission Control into a war room. They brought in equipment I'd never seen before, devices that measured things they refused to explain. The monitors displayed readings in spectrums of light that made my eyes water just looking at them. They spoke in coded phrases and references to events that had been carefully erased from public record. As they worked, Blackwood showed me files documenting decades of classified observations, strange occurrences at the edge of our solar system, distortions in space that defied the laws of physics, objects that appeared and disappeared without explanation, and signals that matched no known pattern of natural or artificial origin. "We built Orion's Reach as a checkpoint," Blackwood explained, "a way to monitor something ancient that's been stirring in the void beyond Pluto. The research mission was real, but it was a cover for the station's true purpose. Those 6 crew members were carefully chosen, not just for their skills, but for their psychological resilience. They were meant to be our early warning system." The rescue mission was already being assembled. but this would be unlike any previous operation. The ship, Rogue Horizon, was a marvel of classified technology, a vessel built not just for space travel, but for encountering things that existed beyond human comprehension. Its hull was lined with materials that hadn't been made public, designed to resist forces that normal spacecraft were never meant to encounter. The rescue crew was equally unique. Dr. Evan Liu, a brilliant physicist who specialized in theoretical space-time anomalies. Captain Drake, whose service record contained entire years marked as classified. Engineer Morgan Wells, who had survived 3 previous encounters with what he would only refer to as deep space irregularities. As the mission prepared for launch, strange things began happening at mission control. Equipment would malfunction in specific patterns, always at 3:47 p.m. Staff members reported seeing their own reflections moving independently in computer screens. Several people complained of dreams where they heard the same sound from Jensen's final transmission, that bone-shaking frequency that defied description. But most disturbing were the messages we began receiving from deep space probes throughout the solar system. One by one, each probe started sending back the same data stream, an endlessly repeating pattern that, when visualized, looked like a spiral spinning into infinity. The pattern started with probes closest to Pluto and worked its way inward, as if something out there was infecting our technology, spreading slowly but steadily toward Earth. The Rogue Horizon launched on December 1st, 2045. I watched from mission control as the ship disappeared into the darkness of space, carrying our hopes and fears with it. The journey to Pluto's orbit would take 3 months, even with the ship's advanced propulsion system. 3 months of waiting, wondering if we'd sent more people to their doom. During those months, I worked closely with Dr. Blackwood's team, analysing the patterns of anomalies spreading through our solar system. We discovered that the spiral pattern in the probe data matched ancient cave drawings found in multiple locations across Earth, drawings that dated back over 30,000 years. Humanity had seen this before, had tried to warn us through the ages. The Rogue Horizon maintained regular contact throughout most of its journey. Captain Drake's reports were professional and calm, but as they passed Neptune's orbit, subtle changes crept into the crew's communications. Dr. Liu began reporting dreams of vast, dark spaces where the laws of physics held no meaning. Engineer Wells would wake up screaming, claiming he could feel something watching them through the ship's hull. At the 2-month mark, they lost an entire day. The ship's chronometers continued functioning normally, but the entire crew experienced what they described as a skip in time. One moment it was ship's morning, the next it was morning again, but a day had passed. The crew had no memory of the missing hours, but the ship's logs showed they had been awake and active, performing tasks none of them could remember. Finally, on March 5th, 2046, the Rogue Horizon reached Pluto's orbit. The first visual contact with Orion's reach sent chills through mission control. The station appeared intact, but something about its appearance caused instant discomfort to everyone who viewed the footage. The angles of the structure seemed to shift subtly when looked at too long, as if the station existed in more dimensions than our minds could process. "There's something wrong with the space around the station," Dr. Liu reported. "Light doesn't bend correctly near the hull, and the stars behind it aren't where they should be." The docking procedure proved impossible to execute normally. The station's automated systems remained unresponsive, and the docking ports appeared to have been sealed from the inside. The rescue crew had to perform a dangerous manual entry through an emergency airlock. As they prepared for the operation, their helmet cameras captured something that made my blood run cold. A brief glimpse of movement inside the station's darkened windows. Something large had shifted in the shadows, something that didn't move like any human. The rescue team entered Orion's reach at 6:13 p.m. Earth time. The moment they crossed the threshold, their vital signs began fluctuating wildly. Heart rates spiked, brain activity patterns became erratic, and their body temperatures dropped several degrees, despite their temperature-regulated suits. "The air feels thick," Captain Drake reported, a voice tight with tension. "Every step feels like walking through invisible cobwebs, and the sounds, God, the sounds." Through their helmet cameras, we could see that the station's interior was fundamentally wrong. Corridors that should have been straight now curved in impossible ways. Doorways led to rooms that couldn't exist within the station's known dimensions. Equipment had been arranged in precise geometric patterns across floors and walls, patterns that made the mind recoil if viewed for too long. The rescue team found the first evidence of the original crew in the main research lab. Personal logs were scattered everywhere, their contents revealing a descent into collective madness. The final entries spoke of dreams shared between crew members, dreams of a vast, ancient intelligence stirring in the void beyond Pluto. They wrote about voices that whispered from within the station's walls, about shadows that moved against the light, and about a growing certainty that they were being watched by something that had existed since before Earth formed. But it was Dr. Hall's private research terminal that contained the most disturbing revelations. Hidden behind layers of encryption, she had documented a terrifying discovery. The station's true purpose wasn't just observation, it was containment. Deep within Orion's reach, in a section that didn't appear on any official blueprints, NASA had built a chamber around something they'd found buried in Pluto's ice decades ago. As Engineer Wells worked to restore power to the station's primary systems, Dr. Liu made an unsettling observation. The air itself seemed to carry a faint luminescence, visible only in absolute darkness. It moved like liquid smoke, forming patterns that hurt the eyes if watched too long. The rescue team's instruments detected radiation unlike anything ever recorded, emanating from deep within the station's core. "We need to access the lower levels," Captain Drake insisted, though her voice trembled slightly. "Whatever happened here, whatever they found, the answers are below." The journey to the station's restricted section was a descent into nightmare. Every step took them further from familiar reality. The metal walls began to feel organic, almost pulsing beneath their gloved hands. The emergency lighting cast shadows that moved independently of any light source, and the air grew thicker, more resistant to movement. They found the first body in the maintenance tunnel leading to the hidden chamber. Commander Blake had apparently barricaded himself there in the final hours. His tablet contained a video log, his last testimony of what had happened on Orion's reach. "The thing in the chamber," Blake's recorded voice shook with fear. "It's not just alive, it's ancient, older than our solar system. When the mining team found it in Pluto's ice, they thought it was dormant, dead. But we were wrong. Our presence here, our technology, our minds, were like an alarm clock to it. Every human consciousness aboard this station has been feeding it, waking it up, and now it's hungry." The video ended with Blake looking over his shoulder, his eyes widening in horror at something off-screen. The rescue team found no other trace of the original crew. The hidden chamber itself defied explanation. It occupied a space that should have been impossible within the station's dimensions, a vast spherical room that seemed to stretch into infinity when viewed from certain angles. In its center, suspended in a containment field of unknown design, floated what appeared to be a fragment of pure darkness. Dr. Liu's instruments couldn't properly scan the object. "It's like trying to measure a hole in reality," he reported, his scientific composure cracking. "The readings suggest it's both there and not there, existing in multiple states simultaneously, and it's growing." The containment field was failing. The darkness within pulsed with an inner light that didn't illuminate, casting shadows that moved toward the rescue team like reaching fingers. As they watched in horror, the fragment began to unfold itself, revealing dimensions that couldn't exist in our universe. Captain Drake made the call to retreat, but it was already too late. The chamber's doors sealed themselves and the station's artificial gravity began to fluctuate wildly. Through their helmet cameras, we watched as reality itself seemed to bend and twist around them. The rescue team's vital signs became increasingly erratic, their heart rates accelerating beyond human limits. "It's in my head," Engineer Wells screamed suddenly, clawing at his helmet. "I can see what it sees, billions of years of darkness waiting, watching. It's been guiding us, all of human history, leading us here." Dr. Liu's voice cut through the chaos. "The containment field, it's not holding it back anymore. It's channeling it. This whole station is an antenna, broadcasting its influence across the solar system. We haven't just woken it up, we've given it a way to reach Earth." Through the fragmenting video feeds, we watched in horror as the darkness began to take form. It moved like oil through water, but in dimensions that shouldn't exist. Where it touched the chamber's walls, metal transformed into something else, something alive and ancient. The rescue team's shadows began to pull away from them, drawn towards the entity, like moths to a flame. Captain Drake managed to activate her emergency beacon, transmitting data that changed everything we thought we knew. The entity wasn't just an alien life form. It was a doorway, a living portal to somewhere unimaginably distant in space and time. And through that door, something was beginning to enter our reality. "The original crew," Drake gasped, her voice distorting. "They're here. They're part of it now. I can see them, see through them. This is what happened to Pioneer's Edge too. The crews didn't die. They were absorbed, changed, and now it wants us all." Dr. Blackwood's voice came through their comms, carrying more fear than I'd ever heard from him. "Listen carefully. The station's reactor, if you can trigger an overload, the blast might seal the breach, but you'll have to..." His voice cut off as all communications from Earth suddenly ceased. The next few minutes were chaos. The rescue team fought against forces that defied physics and sanity. Their helmet cameras showed glimpses of things that made hardened mission control veterans look away in terror. Visions of spaces between spaces, of geometries that broke the mind, of shadows that had weight and substance and hunger. Engineer Wells sacrificed himself to reach the reactor controls, his last scream cutting off as the darkness enveloped him. Dr. Liu's final transmission was a string of coordinates, locations across Earth where similar entities might lie dormant. Captain Drake alone made it back to the rogue horizon, but the woman who returned wasn't entirely human anymore. The nuclear detonation of Orion's reach was visible from Earth's most powerful telescopes. For a brief moment, the explosion lit up the darkness beyond Pluto, revealing shapes and movements that haunted the dreams of everyone who saw them. The blast sealed the breach, but we all knew it was only temporary. They've quarantined Captain Drake in a facility deep beneath the New Mexico desert. Sometimes she speaks in voices that aren't her own, revealing truths about our universe that no human was meant to know. The things she whispers in her lucid moments keep the world's most powerful people awake at night. I'm sharing this story now because the public needs to know. The entity may have been contained, but its influence spreads. Every night, more people dream of the spiral pattern. Astronomers report strange movements in the Kuiper Belt, as if something massive is stirring in the darkness. And in places across Earth, in deep caves, in ancient ruins, in the black depths of our oceans, things that have slept for eons are beginning to wake up. Dr. Blackwood's team was quietly dissolved 3 weeks after the incident, its members reassigned to deep underground facilities across the globe. But before we were separated, he shared one last piece of information that chills me to this day. The mining operation that originally discovered the entity on Pluto wasn't random. They were following a signal, a beacon that had been deliberately activated by something on Earth. The classified files paint a disturbing picture. Throughout human history, certain individuals and groups have known about these entities. Ancient civilizations built temples not to worship gods, but to contain doorways. The mysterious disappearances of human settlements throughout history, from Roanoke Colony to the Anjikuni Lake Village, weren't random tragedies. They were harbingers, signs of these ancient things testing their bonds. I've spent months piecing together the truth from restricted documents and the ravings of Captain Drake. The entity we encountered wasn't unique. It was part of a network, a vast web of similar beings spread throughout the cosmos. Like nodes in a giant nervous system, they've been lying dormant, waiting for a signal. And humanity, in our endless quest for knowledge, just rang the dinner bell. The efforts to contain this knowledge have already begun. 3 days ago, my security clearance was revoked. Yesterday, I noticed unmarked vehicles parked outside my home. They're watching me, waiting to see who I contact, what I reveal. But they don't understand. The truth can't be contained anymore. The entity's influence has already spread too far. People around the world are experiencing strange phenomena. Deep-sea sonar operators report hearing impossible sounds from the ocean depths, rhythmic pulses that match the frequency we detected at Orion's reach. Astronauts on the International Space Station have observed unexplainable lights moving against the starfield, always in the direction of Pluto. Children in dozens of countries are drawing the same strange patterns in their artwork, patterns that mirror the ancient cave drawings we discovered. Most disturbing are the dreams. Thousands of people across the globe report identical nightmares of vast, dark spaces and ancient awareness. They speak of memories that aren't their own, memories of cold void and patient hunger. Some wake up speaking languages that died out millennia ago, describing places that existed before human civilization. Captain Drake's condition worsens daily. During my last authorized visit to her containment facility, she grabbed my arm with unexpected strength, her eyes now with pupils that change shape when you watch them too long, fixed on mine as she spoke her final coherent warning. They gave us fire, the wheel, the first tools of civilization. They guided our evolution, shaped our development, not out of benevolence, but preparation. Like farmers fattening livestock, they've been cultivating us, waiting for the right moment. And now, thanks to our own curiosity, we've finally opened the gate. I know my time is running short. They'll find me soon, try to silence this truth. But perhaps that's part of their plan too. Every attempt at covering up this knowledge only spreads it further, like ripples in a dark pond. Each person who reads this becomes another node in the network, another receiver for their influence. To anyone reading this, watch the skies, but more importantly, watch your dreams. If you begin to see the spiral pattern, if you wake up with memories of ancient darkness, if you find yourself drawn to study the outer reaches of our solar system, fight it. The hunger you feel isn't your own. The curiosity drawing you toward the stars isn't human curiosity. Humanity thought we were reaching for the stars. We never realized the stars were reaching back, pulling us towards something that has waited billions of years for this moment. We thought we were the explorers, the discoverers, but all along we've been the prey, following a carefully laid trail into the darkness. And now, as I look at the night sky through my window, I can't help but notice that the stars seem dimmer than before, as if something vast is slowly passing between us and them, preparing to finally cast its shadow over Earth. They're here. I hear them outside my door. If you're reading this, it's too late for me. But perhaps it's not too late for humanity. Look to the skies, but don't venture too far. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And whatever you do, don't look too long at Pluto, because now Pluto's looking back.